recording here. There we go. All right, so again, welcome everyone. This is going to be the ESO dispatch training, and initially on our desktop here on the server, as well as the desktops you guys should be working for in your workstations, we'll have this ESO billing and dispatch icon. You can go ahead and double click this one, get a little window to pop up saying you want to run this, because what it does is actually runs a little script that checks to see if there's any updates for the application first. If there are, it'll download those updates. If there are no updates, then it's just going to go ahead and start running the application for us. Okay, so with that, since there are no application updates, it gets us right into our ESO billing and dispatch application. I'm going to go ahead and maximize a little bit here first so we get our full screen view. Now, once we're in our application, a few things here. Initially, the way the application itself is laid out, in the upper left-hand side, I have what's called my ESO menu. This is going to give me some background configuration and another quick, easy way if I ever want to close out of the application, I can hit the exit button. Below that, I have three different tabs: Home, Config, and Reports. Okay, Home tab, this is where you're going to spend, the vast majority, I'd say 90–95% of your time in dispatch is actually in this Home tab section. And in the Home tab, we have various different categories: tickets, call entry, dispatching patients, tasks, accounting, and collections. So different areas of the application here. We also have the Config and the Reports tab. Config is where some background configuration tables, like adding new resources, things like that. Reports is where I can run my reports to see what trips I've done for the day. We'll spend a little bit of time. We actually have some calls. I think, Charles, you and I have some calls already scheduled for specific report things, so we'll cover that more in those report-specific calls. Because for our sessions, since most of your time is going to be spent here in the Home tab, we're going to spend our sessions mostly in the Home tab, getting used to what we need to use day to day for the application. Okay. Now, again, I have my different categories within that Home tab. Tickets, this is more, again, since it's a billing and dispatch program, there's certain areas that pertain more to billing, certain areas that pertain more to dispatch. The tickets section has more to do with billing. This is where the billers will go to look for trips after they've been completed, once they want to start billing them out, and that's what the ticket search is for. And this ticket search tab here down below is what I get when I hit the ticket search button. So again, just a way of searching for trips that have already been transported. Okay. Next to that's ticket entry. This is where they can manually enter tickets that maybe didn't get into dispatch for whatever reason. You want to manually create them, you can do it here. Again, since you guys are already creating the calls from the dispatch side of things, this shouldn't be needed very often for them. Import, this is where they can manually import calls from EHR or other outside resources. Again, not something they'll be using very much, or you guys will be using very much, because all the calls and all the data from EHR is going to be automated for the import process. This is just to kick it off manually if needed. Now for us, the next two sections, call entry and dispatching, this is where we're spending most of our time. Okay. Call entry, these are the different call screens I have in the system: emergency, non-emergency, scheduled, call, and wheelchair. And each of those call screens, three of them, emergency, non-emergency, and wheelchair, are all built into what we call our dashboard, which we'll check out here in a minute. Scheduled call creates its own tab, its own little section in the application where I can put in future calls, and we'll spend some more time with that probably on tomorrow's session. Okay. Next to that, I have my dispatching category, and in my dispatching category, the different modules I have are my dashboard module. This is where you will be spending the vast majority of your time in dispatch, is in the dashboard. I'm actually going to open it up right now, since that's where we're going to spend a lot of time today. Next to that, though, I have my map. We'll take a look at how that works here and probably a little later. This is going to show me my runs and my units on a separate mapping window. Runs is similar to trip ticket search in the fact that I'm looking for runs in my system, but this is more from a dispatch perspective. So this is for calls whether they've occurred or haven't occurred yet. I can use my run search. We'll see how that works later today. Schedules, this is if I'm going to set up a recurring schedule for a patient. And taking them again and again and again, I can search for those created schedules and edit them from my schedules module. Logs is the dispatch logs. If I want to see what units have done during their shifts, I can do it with my logs. And on duty is where I put units on duty or take them off duty for their day. Okay. Next to that, I have my patients section. Here I have patient search, patient entry, and merge. Patient search is where I can, like for my run search or my trip ticket search, look for specific patients. So where runs and trip tickets are looking for the actual transports. Patient search is where I go to look for the patients themselves. Okay, want to see what's going on with those records. Patient entry, this is one way I can create a brand new patient, and we'll see how that works here a little bit later. And then merge, this is where I have the same real world person that is in my system as multiple patient records, and I want to merge those multiple patient records together. And we'll play with this probably a little on day 3. All right, the next 3 sections are all billing specific sections: tasks, accounting, and collections. And we're not going to really spend any time on that for our dispatch trainings, but just a little bit what they do. The task sections is where I go ahead and process bills out the door. Accounting is where I work with AR transactions, putting in payments, write-offs, write-downs, posting those transactions, things like that. And collections is if I'm doing in-house collections. My collections workbench is where I can work on that in-house collections information. All right, so again, just some of the other sections in the system. But like I said, we're going to be focused specifically on our dispatching, and with dispatching, we want our dashboard. So I did hit my dashboard button. It did bring up my dispatch dashboard for me, and by default, the way my dispatch dashboard is laid out, in the upper left-hand side of the screen, I have what's called my runs grid. This shows me the trips that are currently either needing to be dispatched, coming up to be dispatched, or they're currently being transported. Lower left-hand side is what I have. It's called my units grid. This units grid shows me the units that are currently on duty, the status they're in, whether they're transporting or not, and additional information about where they might be if they are transporting, what run they're on, information about their next location they're going to, things like that, and we'll cover all that as we go along there. Upper right-hand side of my dashboard, I have what's called my fleets selector. Okay? The fleet selector is going to be very important, and there sometimes can be some confusion with this, so we'll spend a little time here. Fleet selector shows me the fleets that are in my system. Fleets are just different ways of organizing and grouping my units and the calls to associate with those units. Currently in the system, we have 3 fleets: ambulance, medical transport, and training. Okay? And these here are buttons. They're all toggles, essentially. If they're orange, that means they're on. The buttons are on. If they're blue, that means they're off. So right now, all 3 fleets are on, meaning in my runs grid and my units grid, I am seeing runs and units that would be associated with all 3 fleets. I can see right now I have 1 test run in the system already. It's part of the training fleet. I got this fleet field here. Same thing with my units. I have 1 unit currently on duty, also part of the training fleet. Now, with my fleet selector, like I said, these are little buttons, little toggles. If I select one, so I'm going to click on training here, that turns it off. So now I am no longer viewing runs and units associated with the training fleet. I have turned that filter off. Now I'm only going to be seeing runs and units associated with the ambulance and the medical transport fleet, because those are the ones that are currently active. So blue is off, orange is active. If I deselect all of them, well, I get my run back just because I have nothing selected. But again, I can turn on a certain fleet. And again, the system is only going to show me information about that 1 fleet. So this way, with my fleet selectors, if I have lots of calls in the system and I want to break things up, if I have more than 1 dispatcher on duty, I want to break things up, somebody's going to do the ambulance fleets, somebody does the medical transport fleets, I only have to focus on the fleets, on the runs and the units that I'm supposed to be working on today. Okay? Or again, if I want to have multiple ones selected, all I got to do is hit the buttons to toggle them back on. Okay? So fleet selector, upper right-hand side. All right, so far, any questions on our dispatch dashboard, how to bring it up, runs grid, units grid, or the fleet selector?
Nope.
Great. Next thing down below, I have a few different tabs. Initially, I'm looking at my non-emergency call screen tab. Okay, so this is the little section, little call screen I get when I hit my non-emergency button up here in the call entry window. This non-emergency call screen is built into the dashboard itself. Okay, so it just makes it another tab here in my dashboard. Same thing with the emergency call screen. So if I hit my emergency button, also I can see now I get the emergency call screen tab. Okay. Also wheelchair, another one that's built right into my dashboard. Like I said, scheduled call gets its own different tab at the top. We'll play with that a little bit later, but just to see these three call screens, emergency, non-emergency, and wheelchair, are all built right into my dashboard, meaning I can enter calls in these call screens while still working on trips and units that are being dispatched currently. So it allows me to kind of multitask here. Right. Besides the call screens, I also have two additional tabs, run in progress info and unit info. When I select these tabs and then choose, in this case, since I have run in progress info selected, choose a run in my runs grid, this run in progress info gives me additional information about this run. I can get the information about the number, the priority, the patient information, what the issue is, where I'm picking them up, where I'm taking them. Similarly, when I go to my unit info tab, if I then select a unit in my units grid, it gives me more information about that unit, when its shift is, its current status, odometer information, log information. So I can see this one went on duty, at about 11 o'clock. Okay. So run in progress info, unit info, again, gives me more information about either a run selected or a unit selected. Right. Any questions then so far on the dashboard? No? Perfect. All right, next thing. So this is the default layout, but we can customize things a little bit. First of all, obviously, as we saw, if we want additional call screens, we can just hit the call screens button. If I think I have too many call screens, notice as I select these different tabs, the far right-hand side of the tab has a little X. I can hit the X and close down the different call screens. Okay. And that closes down the tab. Now, another thing I can do, quick question for you folks. The workstations that you are currently dispatching on and that you're going to be dispatching on, are you guys working with one monitor on your workstations, or you have a multiple monitor set up?
Multiple.
Multiple. How many monitors are we talking? 2, 3? I've seen 6.
3 currently.
3. Perfect. Well, if I have multiple monitors, I can customize my dashboard to use all of that screen space, all that real estate. What I mean? Well, let's say I have, and again on the server, there's only the one monitor, but let's assume though we had at least 2 monitors, another monitor on the right-hand side, and I want to take my non-emergency call screen and move it to that monitor on the right. So I'm going to go to that tab, that non-emergency tab, click and hold my left mouse button down and drag. And as I drag, notice I get this little bluish window that starts floating on my screen. And then when I get it where I want, I can let go of my left mouse button. And voila, I now have this new window with that call screen. Okay, and I can move this wherever I want. Well, let's also, I want to take, move this a little bit over here. I want to take my unit info and I want to move it on its own window. And in fact, again, one way I like to do it, and you guys can create this and customize it however you want, but one thing, when I move this unit info screen off, if I let go, obviously now it's floating and I can put it where I want. Or if I click and hold my left mouse button down again, start dragging, since I'm on top of that non-emergency window, notice I get these little boxes in the middle of that non-emergency window. And I get an upper box, a right-hand box, bottom box, left-hand box. These outer boxes allow me to split that non-emergency window in half. Right and left, let me split it vertically. up and down, let me split it horizontally. So now you can see I have my non-emergency call screen on the left, my unit info on the right. Then I'm actually going to even take my run in progress info, and I'm going to drag, and now, since I split that one window, I can actually split the window itself. Again, I can split unit info and run in progress info top and bottom, left and right. Or there's now this box in the middle, where if I just let go on that box in the middle for the unit info, that creates this here, a separate tab for me. So now I can see I have a tab for unit info and run in progress info. So left-hand side of this new window, call screen, right-hand side, info screens. Maybe I want to add my emergency call screen. So hit my emergency call screen button. I'm then going to click and drag and put it over here on the left-hand side. So now my emergency and non-emergency call screens are on the left-hand side in their own tabs. I'll even take my fleet selector. This time I'm going to move the fleet selector to the upper half of the right-hand side of this window where I have my run in progress and unit info. So I got this little upper box. Let go, and now it splits it horizontally. I don't want all that space in my fleet selector, so if I go between those two sections, I get this double-headed arrow. And when I get that double-headed arrow, I can click and drag up to adjust the size of that section. Okay, so now I have this whole other window that could be, go ahead and move it over to a whole nother monitor. And I could then expand out my grids to the point that I don't have to really scroll that much anymore to see all of the fields. So again, or if you have 3 monitors, you could even have one monitor for your grids, one monitor for your call screens, and another monitor for your info screens. Right? You can start customizing this however you want. Okay. Now, any questions on customizing, moving things around? Nope. All right, well, sometimes what might happen, what can happen from time to time, is you get a little click happy, or you do a bunch of customization. We get some support calls for this. You've been customizing, you've been moving things around, you think things are good, but like, oh, one more change, just one more change, right? Let me adjust this, and then all of a sudden things aren't looking good. Or maybe you get a little click happy, and what I mean by that is, notice right now, again, I have my call screens and info screen windows kind of floating on top, and this window has a little red X, and everybody knows the red X closes the application. Right, so I'm going to hit the red X, close the application, but it doesn't, okay, because that little X closes the window, meaning it closes down what I had my call screens and my info screens in, but the application itself is still up, right? Or maybe notice my grids here, they have their own little X's. Maybe I get kind of click happy again and I close the X on the units grid. So now all I have left in my dashboard is my runs grid. Everything else is gone, okay? Well, if you need some help, you can always call us to help, or you can go through this process. The other thing to point out is everything I do for my dashboard here, the system saves per my account. So if I go to now close, thinking, hey, I got rid of these things, close, resets, right? I close it, restart, reset, it'll be okay. So I close the application, start running it again, and I'm going to get in, start running my dashboard, hoping all my pieces of the dashboard come back for me. Well, again, the system, like I said, saves it per user account. So however I left the dashboard last is how the system will show me the dashboard the next time I get in. So in this case, with everything missing. Okay. Well, if you do have things missing, or you've done a little too much customization with the dashboard and you need to reset things, well, a couple things you can do. If I have some blank space here, if I right-click the blank space, it opens up a little window with the options, the pieces of the dashboard that I can select from. So if I say I want my unit grid again, the system will bring back up that unit grid for me. And then I can move it back to where I want. I liked it when it was below my runs grid. I want my dashboard run info back. So I hit dashboard run info and it brings that dashboard run info window back for me. Also want my dashboard unit info. Voila, run in progress info, unit info with their own tabs again. Okay. Call screens, obviously I can hit my call screen buttons, right? Bring emergency back. Voila, there's my emergency. Or same thing, if I right click the blank spaces, I have this call screen submenu and I can pick which one I want. I want my non-emergency back, and voila, non-emergency's back. Last thing I need to re-add is my dashboard fleet selector. And there I go. Everything's back to how it was. And again, if I then had this on a whole nother monitor and I have it working how I want, I close down because I'm done with my shift. Some other dispatcher comes in, does their shift, they work, their dashboard set up how they want, doesn't affect them. I come back in the next day, start work again, get back into my dashboard. Again, since it's saved per user account, however I left it is however it's going to be visible for me again, where I have my grids on the left-hand side, actually in grids in the main dashboard, and then I have my info screens, call screens, and fleet selector in the floating window on, again, pretending my secondary monitor. All right. Any questions on customizing, moving things around, or adding pieces that we may have removed that we want back?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
I actually have two questions. The first question is, you stated that say if you accidentally close something out, the system automatically saves it, correct?
So if you close, yeah, if you close it, and it saves based off of the, how you leave the dashboard when you close the application.
Okay, so say if you're inputting either an emergency call or a non-emergency call, and you accidentally hit that box, does it save that information as well that you are currently inputting, or does it just automatically delete and you have to start all over?
It will clear out that information. It saves the configuration, the layout. It doesn't save anything you typed in and then closed with it still in the fields.
Okay. And then you say that there's a way you can save your configuration, like say for each individual dispatcher. So as you said, if I come in, set it up, and the next day, how is there certain can you? I'm trying to think of my question here. Is there a certain specific save file or category that you can put that into? That say I come in and the next dispatcher comes in the next shift, and the next day I come in and I want to open it exactly how I had it the day before. Is there like a certain a save file or something I need to do with that? Or
Travis, can I answer this one?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Charles.
Currently, right now, we are using a generic account, so they log in the computer with the same user. Basically, they don't log out. But before we go live with this, I will create each one of you guys individual user accounts and you log into the computer. Okay. And that's how it saves it. It logs it to your account. You log in and whenever you log off.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Travis.
You're welcome. And yeah, thank you, Charles. And so to that point, it saves it based off of that account, and it's not a file like a save file you can access. It's actually written direct to the database in the background, and it writes it based off of the user account you're logged into the PC with. So that's why. Yeah. Cool. Good questions. Other questions about customizing?
You know what? I actually think I have one more.
Yeah.
You say for, and this may not actually be customizations, but when you have when you're inputting data, say in our current system that we're using, we have drop-down menus for places and locations. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to go in and add or delete or edit places and locations?
So in our system, yeah, we call those locations resources. and there is a resource table where they're all located at. That's on the config tab. In terms of putting calls in, we'll see here in a few minutes we start putting some calls in. We'll see how when we're entering calls, we will use that resource table. We'll kind of can search for those locations and add them to our call screens. Yeah.
Can we edit them as well? Like, 'cause sometimes some of the facilities will actually change addresses, but still say the same facility.
So yes, that would be done via the resources table on the config tab. That's not necessarily something that we cover in our end user trainings, but it is definitely possible. And if we can talk a little bit on our third session. We can maybe go over, it's a QA session, essentially our third session together is, now that you've been using the system, what questions do you have? So we can, if you want, we can cover it on that one too.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And, anything else? Nope. All right, well, since we're on the server and the server just has one monitor and right now things, it's kind of hard to see everything, I'm going to re-add my tabs and things here back down into my dashboard, and I'm actually going to reset it a little bit so it's a little easier to see everything. All right. Let's scroll in. Okay. So now that we know how to set up our dashboard how we want, the next thing is putting calls and units into the system. So obviously we have one call and one unit currently in the system already. I, though, want to get a couple more units on duty before we start entering calls and dispatching those out. So up at the top in my dispatching category, I have my on duty button. It looks like a little ambulance on top of a clock. I'm going to hit my on duty button here. And when I do, it opens up what's called my duty module. And that duty module shows me the units in the system. On the left-hand side, shows me my employees. On the right-hand side, right now, however, I'm not seeing any units. And that's because the duty module, just like my dashboard, has a fleet selector. And so I have my fleet selectors at the top, and currently none of those fleets are active. So I have to hit them. So obviously training, medical transport, we can select all three of them at once. Shows me all my units now, or if I want, I can only look at one at a time. Again, it just depends on which fleets I have selected as to which units I will be viewing on my duty module. Okay. So now I can see here my units. I can tell unit 1 is currently on duty, not only because, well, I just saw it on my dashboard, but also in my duty module, it's the only one that's in yellow. So units that are in yellow are units that are currently on duty. Units that are green are units that are currently off duty. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put a few units on duty. Let's go ahead, we'll say MT1. I want to put that unit on duty, so I'm going to go to the little box in the upper right-hand corner of the unit. I'm going to select it. And when I do, the system zooms in on this unit, and I get some default information about its ID and description at the top. I can see what its default service level is. Stretcher, default fleet is medical transport, and I get its Street Eagle information. Below that, I can see its time zone is currently set to Central, which is fine. I then have a start time and an end time. Okay. Notice the start time and the end time on the units are the only fields that have these red circles with the exclamation marks on them. That's telling me that these are required fields, meaning I cannot put the unit on duty, or any unit on duty, if I don't give it a shift start time and a shift end time. I can even see that right here in the upper right. It's my put unit on duty button. I move my mouse over it. It tells me there's errors, there's problems, but even if I'm going to try to ignore that and hit the button, then it tells me, nope, can't do it. I get this error at the message at the bottom saying it's not possible. So long story short, the point of it is, whether it's in the on-duty module or anywhere else in the system, if you see red circles, or when you see red, that's the system telling you that this is required before we can save what we're doing. All right, so in this case, we'll go ahead and put our start time and end time. Now, question for you folks, tell me a little bit about your shifts. Okay? Do you do 12-hour shifts, 8-hour shifts, 24-hour shifts? What sort of shifts are you guys using?
We run 24-hour shifts, but we run 48 in a row. So the units will come on for actually a 48-hour period.
Okay, so units on for 48, crew members on for 24?
No, they're most of the time they work 48 hours straight.
Okay.
So crew members actually work 48 hours as well.
Okay. Well, and that's every single one of your units?
Well, the MT don't. That's for medical transport. They kind of work 8, 10, 12 hour, 14, 16-hour days. It fluctuates.
Gotcha. All right. Well, since this is an MT, we'll assume that we'll put them on for 12. Okay. And we'll say for them they were on. They started at 8 this morning. They're going to 8 tonight. Okay. So if the unit is going to be on duty, and the start time and end time are both the same day, and they're both today, all I have to do for the start time and end time is put it in as straight time. So we'll say 0800 for the start time. We'll do military 2000 for the end time. The system defaults a date in for me. And then it's good. Then I have the service level of stretcher. Fleet defaults to medical transport. Workflow standard with linked runs. Those are all default. That's fine. One thing we might want to do here for today's purposes, and I recommend if you're playing with the system on your own, everything you do in the training time frame that we have, do in the training fleet and with the training company. So I'm going to go ahead and say this is for today going to be part of the training fleet. The other point to see here is while our units default to certain fleets, and we can leave those defaults in, if a certain day for a certain shift you need one unit to be part of a different fleet, you certainly can do that. Okay? So in this case, I'll make MT1 part of the training fleet. We're then going to go ahead and add a couple of employees. So on the right-hand side, I'm going to have Carissa. I'm going to add her to my crew member section. I can click and drag Carissa and drop her into the crew section. Okay? And I can go down, I can scroll, or notice I can hit the little buttons to get to certain sections. So if I want to get the T's, I can just hit T, takes me right there. And we'll say Mason. We'll add him. I can click and drag, or I can double click. Okay? And so now I have my crew members assigned to the unit. I can then put my unit on duty. So I'm going to hit my put unit on duty button. The system thinks for a minute, and then it puts MT1 on duty. I can tell because it's in yellow. Also, if I go back to my dashboard, I can see now MT1 also on duty. Let's go ahead. We did one of the stretcher units. Let's go ahead and do one of our ambulance units. So I'm going to go to SH1 here. I'm going to hit the little box to zoom in on SH1. I get my defaults, and I get my time zone, and then start time and end time. So we'll say that SH1 is going to be one of those 48-hour units. Okay. So here is where I have to be a little more methodical in how I put in the start time and end time. When the start time and end time are the same day, and that day is today, I can just put in the times, military times, and go. For this, since the start time is on one day and the end time is on another day, I have to give the system those dates. Okay, so first things first, in my start time, we're saying that they're going to do, again, 48 hours, and they also started at 8 today, but they're going until 8 on the 11th. So I'm first going to start with today's date, 1/9/18. And then I put in a space, and then I put in the time. In this case, since I had to put in the date, I also need the colon when I put the time. And then I can tab down to my end time, and they're going to go to the 11th. Also at 0800. Tab away. Now the system's like, yep, that works. So again, the thing to keep in mind is if the start time and end time are on different days, I need to start off by putting those times in with the full date itself. Okay, so the system knows what days the shift is. And again, service level ALS is fine. Fleet, again, we'll move this to training for now. Workflow standard is great. I then want to add my employees, so we'll add Jacob. Double click Jacob. He gets added. We'll also say Vanessa. Now, when I add Vanessa, watch what happens. I'm going to double click Vanessa, and the system's automatically going to change the service level of the unit from ALS to BLS. Okay? That's because even though the default level of the unit's ALS and the default level of Jacob is ALS, the default level of Vanessa is BLS. And the way the system is coded, it's weakest link in the chain theory. So whatever the lowest ranked service level is of any part of the unit, the service level of the unit will be automatically adjusted to it. So since Vanessa was BLS, the system sets the service level to BLS. Okay? The reason we do that is there are certain states where it is legally required that a unit has to be the lowest level of whatever piece is. All right. Now, obviously, if that's not your situation, and even though you have a BLS employee on here, you still want the system to consider this an ALS unit, you can hit the drop-down menu and choose ALS. Or again, set any other service level that you want, ambulatory, wheelchair, stretcher, BLS, ALS. For the unit SH1 for today, we'll say they are an ALS unit. If you do that, the system gives you a warning, right? It tells you, hey, there's a mismatch here. You got ALS selected and you have a BLS employee on here, but it's a warning. When you see the little yellow triangle in the system, that's the system's way of saying this might not be right, but it is not an error. It's not something that will keep you from moving forward, like one of those red circles. Okay, so this is just a warning, not an error. At this point, I can still put this unit on duty, and the system says, okay, that's fine. So I now have SH1 on duty. Again, I can tell because it's in yellow. If I go back to my dashboard, yep, there it is. Okay. All right. Any questions about putting units on duty, especially as it pertains to the start time and end times, or how the service level adjusts depending on who you're adding to the unit?
I do have a question.
Okay.
What if there's a call that goes out and a crew member just jumps on a truck that was available, like in an emergency situation? Do you have to go through and enter all that before you put it on that trip?
So if the unit's already on duty, no. We'll look at how that works in just a minute. If the unit is not yet on duty, yes, you have to go through this duty module to put the unit on duty.
Okay.
Good question. Any other questions?
Will that be the same for changing the crew? Because our MT vans, they'll jump from one van to another van depending on the call.
Okay. So if those units are already on duty, no, you don't have to come back to the duty module. You can, and we'll see that in a second. One of the things, the next thing we'll look at is changing crew members on a unit. But again, if the unit itself is not already on duty, then you would have to go through and put the unit on duty.
So the easiest way, since we have call-in crews come in all the time, if we get busy, we can have all 7 trucks. We normally only have 4 trucks on, but if we get really busy, we can get all 7 trucks on the road in a matter of minutes. So it would be easiest for them just to put all the trucks on duty and not assign crews to them?
You could certainly do that. That would be fine. Okay. Good question.
Awesome.
All right, I'll go ahead and close this down, get back to our dashboard. Now, once I'm in my dashboard, again, we have one call that's already up, and we'll look at that one here in a little bit. If I go down to my units, though, I see, again, information about those units. I can see their unit name, what status they're at, how long they've been in that status, fleet selection. If the system's getting information from their GPS device, I get their location. Right now, since none of these are any runs, my next stop, current run aren't filled out. That's fine. Same thing with priority and problem. Here, though, I can see my crew members. So I can see for MT1, there's Mason and Carissa. For SH1, Jacob and Vanessa, Unit 1 currently has no crew members assigned to it. Okay, so basically that's what happened is I put this Unit 1 on without putting any crew members on the unit. So in this case, I want to add crew members to Unit 1. So that idea that we were just talking about, adding crew members as we go, this is the way you do it. So I'm going to double click Unit 1. When I double click Unit 1, the system opens up what's called my workflow window. Every single one of my units has that workflow associated with it. And the workflow is just basically whatever status the unit's at, the different steps, the different processes we can take with that unit based off that current status. So since my Unit 1 was in the available status, when I double click it, my options for this unit show up here. I can do a few post options. I can say they are additional resource. I can send them an ad hoc message. I can set their location. Lots of different things, and we'll look at most of these different options as we go through our time together. But one thing in here to point out, there's this choice about halfway down called Change Resources. Okay, so I'm going to select Change Resources within my workflow window, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit this check mark to process a step, or double-clicking that option does the same thing as clicking and then check mark. Real quick, before I move too far ahead, one thing to point out is I made an adjustment to my workflow window. You guys initially on your workstations, when you first start working with your workflow window, it'll be shrunken down like this, meaning if I want to see all the options, I have to use my scroll bar to find them. I don't like doing that, so that's why I always come in and adjust the size of it. And just like my dashboard, the rest of the dashboard, as soon as I make this adjustment, the system will keep this setting for me. I also like making it a little longer than maybe the options that I can currently see, because depending upon the status, my workflow window can have multiple different choices, and this list can be longer or shorter depending upon that status. Okay. So in this case, I do want my change resources. I'm going to go ahead and select that option in my workflow. I then get this change shift request window to pop up. Again, it's a little shrunken down, so I'm going to resize it. And when I do, I can see it basically showing me the employees that are in my system. I see some employees are kind of looking like, regular text. Some, like Carissa here, are grayed out. The ones that are grayed out are employees that are currently assigned to other units. Okay. If I select an employee, or if I already have employees on this unit, employees that are blue are ones that are associated with this unit, and the ones that just like standard are ones that are not currently associated with any unit. So we'll go ahead, we'll say I also want Gary, and then I hit my check mark to process the step, and when I do, if I again scroll right, I can see I now have those crew members, Lucas and Gary, associated with Unit 1. If for some reason, maybe let's say MT1 here, I need to change the crew members on that. I can double click MT1 to open up its workflow, and I'll say change resources. Maybe they're done with their shift. Carissa's not on anymore, so I can select Carissa. She's now off, deselected, and I'll go ahead and say Kenneth. Same thing with, let's see, who else do we have on this one? Mason is off, and we'll say Jim is on. Okay. Another thing to point out, even the ones that are kind of grayed out, like Gary, if I click on him, there he's selected now, I can say Gary is actually on 2 different units at the same time. Maybe you had to jump to this one for just a trip real quick. All right, to help out. Okay. Or again, if I want to take Gary off of MT1, I go back into Change Resources. I find Gary. Select him, so he's deselected, process. And now it's just Jim and Kenneth. Okay. Any questions on changing the resources, adjusting the crew members that are associated with the unit while it's on duty?
Can you do that while they're on a call? Let's say one vehicle intercepts another, that crew member gets onto the other vehicle. Can you change that crew to that while it's on a run?
Yeah, that change resources option should always be on your workflow. It's one of the always on.
So even if it's on a call, you can change that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good question. Other questions? Nope. All right. So now that we have our units on duty and we have a run in the system, I want to get this run dispatched out. So a couple different ways I can do that. Initially, I can click and drag. There's always the click and drag option. So if I click and drag and I hover my mouse over the different units down below, I can see which unit is highlighted, let go of the mouse button, and the system will assign that run to that unit. Okay. Now, especially if I have a lot of units on duty, or all my units on duty, sometimes, and maybe if I'm moving too fast, I might accidentally drag that to the wrong unit. You can fix that, but at the same time, there's another way to assign runs to units that I like a little better, and that is the assign run window. And I get there by double-clicking a run that's not currently associated with the unit, that's not currently assigned. So if I double-click the run instead in my runs grid, I get this alert unit window to pop open. I'm going to go ahead and make this window a little bit bigger, because here I can see information about the call, patient information, pickup time, destination information. I also see information about my units, okay, and where they're at. And let's say for this one, we'll start with unit 1. I want unit 1 to take this call. I can double click unit 1 and the system will go ahead and try to assign this call to unit 1. Now the first thing I get is this warning that the unit service level of ALS does not match the run service level of ambulatory. Okay, so the run's an ambulatory run, the unit is an ALS unit. And it's asking me, am I sure I want to do this? Do I want to do a service level, cross service level alert, since they don't match? You can say yes or no. For us, we'll go ahead and say yes. So the system will then go ahead and assign the unit to the run. And I can see both in my runs grid, I get now the unit association, and in the units grid, I get the run association. Also, I now get the next stop to fill out for me. And I get information now about the call that's associated with that unit. Okay. All right, so now unit 1, they're alerted. So now it's just the process of dispatching the call out. So I'm going to go ahead, we'll say unit 1 has radioed back in. They are en route, so I'm going to double click unit 1. And I again get the workflow, but now because the run has been assigned to the unit is in the alert status, the system defaults to the next step in the dispatching process, which in this case is en route. So we'll say they are en route. And not only are they en route, we'll say they weren't that far away. We'll say they are at scene. Okay, so again, double click them. And again, based off of what status the unit is in, I get my different options in my workflow. In this case, since they're en route, the next step in the process, at scene. Okay. And I can see they're now on scene. After on scene, we'll say they got our patient, which in this case I think is Daffy Duck. They got Daffy loaded on a stretcher, put into the back of the unit, and they're now departing the scene. So I hit depart scene. Now when I get to the depart scene step, the system asks me, okay, what is the odometer information when we're departing the scene, because it wants to track the loaded mileage. Currently, are you guys from dispatch, are you getting the odometer information from your crews when they're transporting?
Yes.
All right, and are you guys starting at 0 every time? Are they giving you their last 4?
En route, they start out with 0. Then when they get on scene, they report the mileage.
Okay, so we'll say 2.6 here. So we put in our odometer information. Okay. And now they're transporting Daffy. See where they picked him up, where they're headed to. Again, it's for a doctor's appointment. Again, information I can see in the unit grid, information I can see in the run grid. And they'll say they have now reached their destination. So we'll go ahead, double click it, process the step. Once again, the odometer information, we'll say 7.5, and either hit the check mark or hit enter, and the system will take that. They're at their destination. We'll say they slowed down just enough to push Daffy out of the back. They're done with the call and they're clear, so I want them to be completed. To do that again, it's a simple process, opening the workflow, defaults to complete, you can hit the check mark or enter, processes the step, and now the run has been completed, meaning it's no longer in my runs grid, it's done. The unit gets marked available again, ready to take another transport. Okay. Any questions?
I do have one, Travis.
Yeah. Go ahead.
We get a 100-mile warning, over 100-mile warning. I haven't seen that in the setup anywhere. Can you show me where that is at real quick? Because we do a lot of calls over 100 miles. I don't want that warning to pop up every time.
So the 100-mile warning would actually, it wouldn't be, it's not in the dispatch side, I believe. It will show it on the actual trip itself. And we'll look at a trip record here in a minute, and I'll show you where that will come up when we look at a trip record.
Okay, if it's on the billing side, we'll catch that when we get
Yeah, so from the billing perspective, they will absolutely see it.
Okay, we'll handle that when we do billing.
Okay.
Now, is there a way to set it when you get on scene to put the mileage in, or is it when they depart scene it's got to stay that way?
So the way the system's been coded, it's on the depart scene step because the system's looking for loaded mileage. And so the loaded mileage would happen from when they're transporting. So from the depart scene step to the at destination step.
Okay.
Good question.
Is there a way to edit the times?
Yes, there is, and we will take a look at that here in a little bit. We'll definitely cover that today.
Can you put one truck on multiple calls?
So you mean, yes, depending on a couple things, and there's, are you
like
talking?
We have stretcher vans that will do a stretcher and ambulatory at the same time, traveling the same, to the same town. And sometimes we'll do the same truck on 2 or 3 different patients at the same time.
So we'll definitely cover that. There's a couple different ways that can happen, and it depends on a few things. One, and I think you said stretcher vans. So your stretcher vans are set to have, notice each unit has this capacity thing here. Capacity means how many active runs they can be on. Okay, so Unit 1 and SH1 are set to 1. They can be in 1 active run. MT1 is 3, so I can have up to 3 different runs associated with that unit at one time, and it can go pick up patient A, pick up patient B, pick up patient C, and then take them all to their different destinations.
Okay.
So yes, that's possible. It would, and right now it's only really set up for your stretcher units. And we'll look at that. We'll do that one of those. Depending on timing, we'll walk through that either later today or possibly tomorrow. Good question. Other questions?
No. Well, what if you have 2 units responding to the same call? Like if they need multiple units?
So
you just drag both of those onto there?
So it's in the system, it's a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of if I have a call, I can put it on 1 unit. Once it's assigned to 1 unit, I can't assign that call to a different unit unless I unassign it from the original one. But I can, in the workflow, I can say that the unit is an additional resource.
Okay.
And then I can add a note, and we'll see how that works here in a bit, to say that this unit helped with such and such a run.
Okay.
Now, if you want us to just, like currently do, just create a whole new call for, like on a new VA, you'll add additional resources. You only want to deal with 1 call per VA. There may be multiple patients. You only want to deal with 1 call as far as time.
All right. Any other questions? All right. And let's look at some other things that can happen during our day. So, one thing we haven't looked at is actually entering a call. So I want to, I'm taking another call now. We're going to go ahead and put it in our non-emergency call screen. So on the right-hand side, I have these fields to fill out. Again, there are certain fields that are required. I can see those have those red circles. All right, so I need to make sure I have company, call type, priority, and fleet selected. The rest are not necessary, but the more information I have, the better off it is for everybody. I'm going to go ahead and set my company here to training company. And our call type will be, let's go BLS. Caller, we'll say, is a nursing home. Data services today. Pickup time, we'll say, is going to be for 12:45 for a 1:15. Too many ones. 1:15 appointment. Problem, we'll say, is a doctor's appointment. Priority, we'll go with basic life support. Service level, also basic life support. And fleet, we'll stick with our training fleet. Pick up notes, so any additional information about the trip I can add and pick up notes. Okay. Next, I have my patient section. So this is where I start entering my patient information. So we're going to say the patient's last name is Duck, and I'm going to hit tab. As I do that, as I start moving down through the patient information, the system on the right-hand side is going to show me patients that match what I've already typed in. Okay, since the last name was Duck, the system's showing me other patients with the last name Duck. If this patient is already in the system, that's the patient that I want to use, I will double-click it from the list on the right. If it's not the patient I want, we'll say, in this case, the patient's first name is Donald. I can continue to enter it. The system, again, if there's another Donald Duck in there, it'll still show in the matching patients. But if that doesn't match anybody, obviously it blanks out. Okay. When I save this call, if I do not pick a matching patient, the system assumes that what I'm entering is a brand new patient record, and it creates a new patient for me. I don't have to do it anywhere else. I can create a new patient just by typing it in. All right, so that's great. But also, that's kind of just one thing to be aware of. If the patient is actually already in the system, so let's say this was Daffy instead of Donald, and I do not double-click the matching patient on the right-hand side, I don't associate that patient to this call, the system, even if it's all the same real-world person, if I don't actually associate the record to the call by double-clicking it, the system assumes it must be a different patient and creates a brand new patient record. So one way I can get duplicate patients is by typing in the same information for the same person and not selecting the matching patient record. Okay? So again, long story short, if the patient shows up in matching patients on the right, double-click it. Okay? If it doesn't, you can keep typing it out. All right, so then we'll say his birthday. Again, none of these are required, but the more information you have, the better. So we'll say 97654 have weight and height and put it in. If not, no big deal. All right, then I have my pickup and my destination information. Okay, so I asked earlier about your resources and how we use those. Well, in our system, those resources, those locations that we have, each location has its own individual resource code. Okay? If I know the resource code, I can type that code in right here. If I don't know the code, I can then hit this little magnifying glass to the right to open up my search window. So in this case, we'll say maybe we don't know the code, so I hit the search. Then I can search for my resources with various fields. I can say what's the resource name, what city is it in, what type is it. If I know part of the address, I can type that address in. For me, I know it's a nursing home, so I'm going to hit this little drop-down menu and say nursing home, so the system will only show me nursing homes. Okay. And then we'll say maybe I want Brookhaven, so I can find Brookhaven in my list. I can double-click it, and the system will bring Brookhaven in for me. If there's a certain room to pick him up in, 125, I can add that information in the room. Okay. All right. Next, destinations. Where are we taking them? Well, again, if I know the code, I can type the code in. Otherwise, I can search for it. So we're taking them to a hospital. What's the hospital you guys work with the most?
Ozarks Medical Center.
Say, what was the first name?
Ozarks
Ozarks.
Medical Center.
So I can actually just start typing in, and there it is. So this might be a code this will be a code you start learning a lot. OMC. All right. So we'll go ahead and say that's the one we want. Double click it, and we can say floor 3, room 321C. Whatever it is. Okay. So now I have my pickup. I have my destination. Things are looking good. I can then save my call. This check mark up here. Okay. When I do, based off of the call's priority, a few things will happen. So the priority does a lot of different things for me. First of all, we can see based off the priority, it can color code it. Right. Our first call for Daffy was, I believe, white because it was a scheduled transport priority. This is a basic life support priority, so it's in blue. Priorities will also prompt me if I want to set up a return, if that's what the priority's been set to. So basic life support has been set to ask me if I want to set up a return trip, right? So we're taking Donald out. Are we going to be taking him back? Okay, we'll say yes, we are. If we weren't, I could then just close this window. If it's just a one-way trip, I can close here with that X or the big circle X at the bottom, and the system will just have the one-way trip for me. In this case, we do want to set up a return. The system defaults the run number and the pickup and appointment time for me to 23:59, meaning 11:59 tonight. It defaults to that in case we don't necessarily know what that pickup time is. Okay, so at least it gets us something in there. If we do know what the pickup time is going to be, we can put that in. We'll say the pickup time is going to be for 15:30. Defaults to priority. If there's a prior authorization number, I can put that in. Otherwise, I can hit my check mark to save, and now I have both Donald's outbound and Donald's return in my application. Any questions on entering a call with my non-emergency call screen? All right. So next, we want to get this assigned out. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry about that. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
No problem.
When you were talking about inputting your patient trip info, when you do, you said when you type in an individual's name, correct? It saves, it brings up what that patient, where they were transported to or where they were picked up at. That's still, you'll get like, will it save every single one that they go to or go from for that individual patient?
Yeah, so every trip a patient is on, every trip a patient is associated with, if I look up the patient's record, I can see the history of their trips. Yes. We'll look at that here in a bit.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question. Other questions? All right, well, let's go ahead and get our outbound run set up for Donald. I haven't picked up, so I'm going to, again, open up my alert unit window. The system shows me some information about this call up at the top. SH1 hasn't done much today, so I want to get this assigned to SH1. I'm going to double-click SH1, and the system, again, because the call is a BLS service level and the unit is an ALS unit, asks me, am I sure I want to do this cross service level alert? I can say yes. Okay, so we'll say yes, and now unit SH1 is alerted. The call I can see is associated with SH1. Right. Then I'm going to say they are actually en route.
Hey, Travis,
Yes.
like on that last one, the unit status, you just made them en route.
Mhm.
Can you hit the enter instead of clicking since it's the default?
Yeah, so let's say they're at scene, so I'm going to go ahead and double click. Opens up my next step window. If I just hit enter, you can't really see it, but I enter on my keyboard, it's the same thing as clicking that check mark. Yep. So now I can see they're on scene.
Faster.
Now, a couple things. Maybe I was anticipating them getting on scene and anticipated incorrectly. You know, they radioed in and say, you know, unit SH1 radioing in, and like, oh, they're going to be at scene. And I say, yeah. And I put them on scene, and then I say, go ahead. And like, yeah, we're in traffic. We're going to be like 5 minutes late. Oh, they're not on scene yet. So if I ever have moved a unit too far ahead in the process, I can right-click the unit, and I get another little menu. And one of the options in the menu is roll back status. So I'm going to choose roll back status here, and when I do, the system will put them back a step. Okay. So I can put them back to en route. Right. And again, they'll say they're on scene. Process that. Actually, we'll say in this case, SH1 has departed the scene. And I get the mileage. Let's say it was 1.7. All right, so far, we've kind of seen this before. We've already did it with our first trip, just walking through the process step for step for step. Now,
Can I ask you a question?
yeah, go ahead.
Some of our MT drivers won't give us times until they're back at base. Can you go back in and change those?
Yeah, so let's say, well, actually, yes, we can. I'm going to show you that in a specific example here in a little bit.
Okay.
In fact, we'll combine what we're doing here with that as well. But yes, we will absolutely do that. Okay. Now, SH1, they're departing the scene. Let's say while they're departing the scene, they, weren't paying much attention. They hit a big pothole and they popped a tire. Okay. So SH1, while they're transporting Donald, they're having this problem. They need to be put as unavailable, essentially. They're out of service because they got a flat tire, and we want to make sure we have another unit that goes and picks up Donald. So the first thing I need to do as a dispatcher after I get that radio call is, again, open the unit's workflow. So I'm going to double-click SH1, and when I do, again, I have all my options. Enter obviously takes them to at destination. I don't want that. I want this choice a little over halfway down called reassign run. Okay. Reassign run will take the call that's associated with SH1, disassociate it from SH1, put it back in my grid as unassigned, and put SH1 as back available. Okay, so reassign run takes the run that's assigned, puts it back in, and lets me assign it to somebody else. Another choice in this situation, since SH1 is actually out of service, they have a mechanical issue, there's a problem with the unit, I'm actually going to say out of service. Okay, and here's what happens when I do out of service. It does the reassign run option. We'll see it in a second, but it also puts the unit out of service so I can know I cannot assign a call to this unit anytime soon. So when I choose out of service reason, so out of service, it makes me pick a reason. Notice red circle. I have to do it, so I have to tell it why. So I'll say in this case, the choices I have: engine trouble, flat tire, PR event, and routine maintenance. I'll say the unit has a flat tire. Okay. And comment, I can add additional information here. Hit pothole, popped tire. And then enter or check mark to process that step. When I do, because the unit is out of service, I can see it goes right to out of service, the run that was associated with it goes back to not being associated with anything. Okay, so I can assign it to another unit. All right, in this case, I'll go ahead and get this over to Unit 1. So I'm going to double click it, and then I'm going to say Unit 1. Notice when I open my Alert Unit Info window, I get Unit 1 MT1. Unit SH1 is not showing because it's not available for taking a trip. So it's an unavailable unit. If I want to see what units I have that are in an unavailable status, I can always hit unavailable units down below, and it shows me, yep, SH1, they're out of service. Okay. In this case, we want unit 1 to take Donald. Again, we get our mismatch because it's a BLS call and an ALS unit. That's fine. And we can walk unit 1 through the process. All right, en route, at scene, and we'll say they've got Donald from SH1 and they are now departing the scene. Okay. So far, any questions on this situation? Have a unit with a run assigned, unit has an issue, put the unit out of service, and it puts the run back to being available again for assigning to another unit. And also, even if the unit wasn't out of service, if I just wanted the run to be assigned to a different unit for whatever reason, I need that unit for something else, I can choose that reassign run option from my workflow. All right, next thing. So we'll say, yeah, unit 1 had been assigned this call. I want to kind of see how things are looking for this call, since there's been a lot going on. Maybe I want to add some notes, some information. So I can always open up the workflow for the unit the run is assigned to, and in the workflow is notes option. So I'm going to go ahead and put in notes, and I'm going to say, add information about what's happened. Call originally assigned to SH1. SH1 had a flat. Reassigned run to unit 1 and put SH1 out of service. All right, the more information you add, the better it is for everybody. I'm going to hit tab. It takes the note. I can save that. Okay, and I'll close that down. If I want to see what that note looks like, if I have my run selected in my runs grid or that unit selected, I get, again, my run in progress info tab and my unit info tab, right? Run in progress, I get more information. On the server, things are a little shrunken down, so it's hard to see. I'm going to pop this off for a minute so I can show you some more information here on run in progress info. Make this quite a bit bigger. I can see I get my notes section. Okay, I get information about the odometer readings that I've had. All right, I got 2 of them from 2 units. All this extra information now. Same idea. If I go back to my unit info, with this unit selected, I get information about the unit. Again, we'll drag this up a little bit, make it easier to see everything for the time being. And I can see for this unit, the different status this has been at for the different runs. The initial run that we put it on, and now this new one since SH1 went out of service. Another place I can get more information, if I right-click the run in the runs grid or the unit the run is assigned to in the units grid, either place, I get that little menu. We saw the rollback status. I also have this choice of edit run. If I go to edit run, it's actually going to open up my what's called trip ticket record. Okay? This trip ticket record gives me the information about the trip as I entered it into the system. It starts me on the dispatch tab, so I can see all that stuff I put into my call screen when I first entered this call. I also, if I scroll down, have the section for my times and odometers. I can see things that have occurred. So if I need to edit times, this is one place, this is where I can do it. Okay. And we'll look at that in more depth here in a second. Then I have my notes tab. So this is where I can see those notes that I entered from my dashboard. Or again, if I want to, I can add additional notes here as well. Okay. And Charles, to your question about mileage, up at the top, In my detail tab, after the trip has been completed, the system will have a start and end odometer, and it'll tell me if, it'll give me a warning here at the end odometer if it's over 100. So for your billers, this is where they can find that. It'll tell them right on the detail tab, and that all fills in after the call has been completed anyway. Cool. All right, any questions on how to get to my trip ticket record from my dashboard?
Hey, Travis, could you go back to the notes section again?
Mhm.
Right where you're at. You'll notice that the date and the time and then the user, whenever I give you guys individual user accounts, it'll actually pop up with your name there so you don't have to build notes and enter the notes, stuff like that automatically. But right now it'll show up with MCOM because you guys are using generic login.
Right.
All right, thanks, Travis.
Will it also give a history like it does currently with the MRS, where whoever enters what, will it specify who entered what and when? Like if you do multiple notes on the same call, but it's different users, will it like timestamp, okay, this person? Yeah.
So yeah, everybody who puts a note in, it timestamps when they did it and who did it. And in fact, the system timestamps pretty much everything. So like even when I entered the call, if notice each one of the fields that I'm, on the trip ticket record as I was entering it, they all have this little bluish box next to it. If I hit that, it tells me who did that and when they did it, and what it used to be and what it was set to now.
So in other words, when we get 2 full-time dispatchers in there, you enter the call, and she, Tanya goes back in and changes service level. They'll stamp it that Tanya changed that. You entered it and Tanya changed it.
Okay, cool.
So like if you're on, went to a different call, and she entered something, you'll say that she entered it on your call.
All right. Any other questions then? No? All right. Let's go ahead and close. I'm going to close down my trip. Take me back to my dashboard. All right. So again, in this example, had a call, had assigned to SH1. Then SH1 had an issue, so reassigned it. Okay. Now, not only that, let's say, okay, maybe Unit 1, right now it says they've been at the depart scene for 7 minutes. Let's say instead of depart scene 7 minutes, they've actually been at depart scene for 70 minutes, right? Or 70 plus 70 minutes, whatever it is. They've been at depart scene longer than it probably should have been, right? It shouldn't have taken more than 15, 20 minutes to get from the pickup to the destination. So we're getting a little suspicious, right? So we radio over to Unit 1 and say, hey guys, how's that trip for Donald going? And they radio back and say, oh yeah, we've been done with that trip for about 45 minutes. Sorry. Never happens, right? No. All right, so we have this call, and it's completed in the real world, even though in our system, it's still showing that it's transporting. So I can do a couple things. Obviously, I can open up my workflow and process all the steps. So maybe, I'm only at depart scene, not that many to process. I can do it really quickly. Maybe they didn't get back to me after they were en route. They've been sitting en route for an hour and a half. So I can do that, but it's got to do it like 4 or 5 times. The other thing I can do, in my workflow, I have 3 from the top on any unit that is currently transporting a call. So any of those transporting statuses. Alert, en route, at scene, or on scene, depart scene, at destination. I always will have this complete fill option 3rd from the top. So I'm going to select complete fill. And here's what the system's going to do. It's going to go ahead and it's going to essentially close that call, mark everything completed. It's going to make the unit available again. It's going to give me this run recall window on my screen so I can get some information about that call and what might have happened. All right. I'm going to close that down. I can see it takes the unit, marks it available. It has now completed the call. So no matter what step I'm in, if I just want to have it immediately complete the call, I can use my complete fill option. Okay. Any questions on what complete fill does? All right. Next, SH1. Again, we'll say they got their flat fixed. I'm going to double click them to open up their workflow. They're available again for taking more transports. All right. So, lots of different things we covered there in that example. Just kind of brief review. We had a call. First of all, we entered the call from our non-emergency call screen, saw how that worked. Then we assigned the call out to a unit. The unit ran into an issue while it was transporting, so we had to put the unit out of service. When we put the unit out of service, it reassigned the run that it was transporting as well. We then took that run, assigned it to another unit. We added some notes with our workflow. We edited that run so we could get into the trip ticket record and look at the information there. And then the unit themselves never actually really radioed us, so we had to use our complete fill option to get that call cleared out. Any questions on any of that? And the one question that everybody should be wondering is, okay, great, we did the complete fill. Those times are wrong. I need to fix those times. Right? Okay. So that is the next thing. We have a call. The call has been completed. I need to adjust the times on that call. I need to edit the call, make some changes. Now, we already saw how to edit a run when the run's in the runs grid, or it's assigned to a unit. I just can right-click the run or the unit and say edit run. The problem here is the run is no longer active. It's been completed. I can't just right-click it and say edit run. I need to find that transport in my system. And the way I find transports in the system is I use my run search up at the top. Okay, so I have my button, looks like a magnifying glass on top of an ambulance. I'm going to hit that, and it opens my run search for me. And now I'm looking for trips, and I need to tell the system exactly what trips I'm looking for. So I can filter, I can use certain search criteria here to find exactly what I'm looking for. Several criteria to pick from. Data service, patient name information, the fleet association, even the unit that took that trip, the pickup location, destination location, run number if I know what it is. Right? Lots of different fields to choose from. For us, a couple things that I really remember about this trip is obviously it was from today. So where it says data service, I can put in today's date, 1/9, or here's just a little FYI in our system. Wherever there's a date field, if you want to use today's date, you can always just put in the letter T. Okay, so I want today's date, and then I know the patient's last name was Duck. It's about as much as I can remember about that transport, and that's fine. So I've gone ahead, put in some information, and now I can search. So I hit the search button on the right-hand side, that magnifying glass. Down below, I get the results. I can see, well, I have one trip for Donald Duck, but this is his return trip for later on. I see the pickup time's 15:30. That's not the one I'm looking for. I'm looking for Donald's outbound trip. So I'm missing it. It's not there. Well, here's the thing. When I use my run search, the very end of the run search, last couple criteria, well, last few, very important options. I have two check boxes, complete and canceled. Okay. And right now, complete's box is blank. Canceled box has a dash. All right. So complete and canceled. The blank means false. So right now, what I'm really telling the system is show me every trip with today's date of service that has the patient's last name of Duck that has not been completed. That's why I get Donald's return trip later today. Okay. Canceled right now is a dash, so I can have a blank, I can have a check, or I can have a dash. The check means true. Right? Show me it where this thing has occurred. So put in a check and complete, and if I search again, it's going to show me all those trips that have been completed where the patient's last name is Duck. And then the dash, like canceled as dash, that means either or. So really, technically, what I'm telling the system right now is show me every trip from today's date of service where the patient's last name is Duck, that has been canceled, has been completed, whether or not it's been canceled. So if I hit search again or enter twice on the keyboard, the same as hitting search, I now get my results. I can see I have one trip for Daffy and another trip for Donald. And it's that trip for Donald that I want. All right, so now I can open that trip. But any questions on using the run search or the importance of the complete and cancel checkboxes? All right, so let's go and open up the trip for Donald. I'll double click it. The system will take me right into that trip ticket record like we saw before. In here, I'm on the dispatch tab. That's kind of where I want to be, because remember, at the bottom left of the dispatch tab is where I have my different times. And I can see I got the ones for when SH1 was the unit, and I put them out of service, and then I get the times for when Unit 1 became the unit. And I can see my at destination and my available times. They're the exact same time. Those are the ones that are in error. So now I need to fix those. All of these times, there's two different time fields. There's logged and there's actual. Logged means when did this occur in the system? When did these things occur in the system? And I cannot make any changes to the log time. All right, these are just historical records, just timestamps essentially to see when these things happened. However, the actual time, these are the ones that I can make some changes to. So we'll say the actual time, I'm going to actually make this a little bit bigger here. The actual time that they got at destination wasn't 12:23, it was actually 12:20. So I'm going to update this to be 12:20. Once I fix that and tab away or click off the field, the system is then going to give me one of those red markers in the reasons table. Why? Because the system is telling me I cannot change any of my actual times without telling the system why I'm making that change. Okay? So I have to tell it the discrepancy reason why my time is different now. So I'm going to hit this little drop down, and I'm going to tell them it was crew error, and I'm going to say crew, in the comments, crew failed to radio in. Okay, great, perfect. So I fixed my actual time on my at destination field. Next, I have my available time. When they were completed, set as 12:23, they were actually completed at 12:28. So I'll fix that. Again, because I made a change to the actual time, I have to give it a reason. It can be the same reason, but I still have to do it. Every time I make a change, I have to give it that actual line of reason, and I can put the same information or just leave it blank, copy, paste it, whatever I want to fill in the comment section. Comment's not required, but a reason is required when I make that change. Any questions on editing my times? Nope. All right, next thing in my odometer section, I notice I have my depart scene odometer information for Unit 1, but I don't have what the ending odometer is, the at destination odometer, so I need to add an odometer reading. So I'm going to this little plus sign here next to odometers to get a new window to pop open so I can add another odometer entry. And again, it's a little shrunken down, so I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And here I can see my run number. I can see the unit is 1, since they were the unit that ended up taking this call. The unit status, so what status in the dispatching process should this odometer correspond to? We'll say it's the at destination status. The ticket odometer type, so this is going to be where we ended the trip, right? So the start is the same as the depart scene. The end, when we're finishing the trip, the end of the loaded mileage is the end here, is the at destination. And then the actual odometer will say 9.4. Okay. I can hit enter or my check mark. You can see the system then adds that entry, leaves the window open for me if I need to add an additional one. Maybe, we did complete fill before we even got to depart scene, so we can add additional ones. Once I'm done adding those odometer entries, I can then close down. Once I have all of my information fixed and updated on my trip ticket record, I have the check mark, just like when we save a call. This is to create a call. This is to save my changes, and I'm going to save that. Any questions there?
Big important thing is here, after you make that change, you have to save it like you just did that checkbox at the top, which is grayed out now because there's no change in the change. Gotta remember to save that record or that you will change it. It will pop up with a warning though if you try to close it, right?
If I try to close it, it'll come up and say, like, let's say, let me fix this R. So that's new. If I just close, it says, hey, you still have edits that things you've changed. Are you sure you want to close? Because if you do, they won't be saved. If I say no, oh, yep, that's right, I fixed the R, and then I saved it, and then I can close.
And then if you have to go onto a different tab, you can. It won't.
Right. So this will always save. So let's say, what can I adjust here? I'll just, add something in patient info. Has temper. All right. And then if I go to a different tab, come back, it's still there. I still have to save it. If I go to a different tab and try to then come back and close this tab, I'll still get that warning. Are you sure you want to close? If I say yes, then it's not going to save that change I just made.
I don't like that part a lot.
All right, any other questions there?
Can I make a comment on the discrepancy reasons?
Sure.
On discrepancy reasons here, you guys, I printed off that form that I told you I filled out for all the tables and stuff. I gave them reasons how to use it. Like for EMT, if they don't call in because you're busy or you don't have time to answer them, and they go on, you don't have to go back and edit the time. Use routine change because it's really not an error, right? Okay, or because we don't dispatch emergency calls, we usually have to go back and change those times or something like that. Use routine change because it's really not an error. It wasn't your fault that you had to do it or the crew's fault, so just use routine change on that. Okay, that's good. Thank you, Travis.
No problem. All right. Next thing. So on with that, we can go back to our dashboard here. So far, we've looked at some standard calls and calls in terms of entry done via the non-emergency call screen. Okay. Let's go ahead and put in a call with our emergency call screen. Okay. So there are going to be some differences. We can see initially already where our non-emergency call screen had 2 columns, the emergency call screen only has the 1 column. There's actually less fields here. Some other things, well, I still have my patient section, and I still have a pickup section, but there is no destination section. Okay? Again, not really necessary because it's an emergency call. One thing I do want to point out, just because we're entering this call in the emergency call screen doesn't mean we are limited to the emergency call screen for putting in emergency calls. I can absolutely put emergency calls in on my non-emergency call screen. Just like I can put non-emergency calls in on my emergency call screen. Although, again, it's limiting what fields I have, and if I have more information, probably better to use my non-emergency call screen. It's not what I'm trying to say is, it's not the call screen that determines whether or not the system considers the trip an emergency trip. Okay. What determines if the call should be considered an emergency or not is that I have the emergency priority selected. Okay, so it's the priority that determines if the system handles this as a 911, as an emergency transport, or not. All right, so we talked a little bit already about how priority determines the color, how it determines, when it's going to show up on my grid, but also it's the priority that determines whether the calls are emergency calls or not. Emergency priority is my priority for emergency calls. All of the others are not considered emergency transports. So like I said, I could absolutely put in an emergency call from my non-emergency call screen just by picking the emergency priority here. Okay? And same way, it can be a non-emergency call I put in through my emergency call screen if I pick one of my other priorities. All right. So again, just to kind of keep in mind, it's not the call screen, it's the priority. Now with my emergency call screen, the idea here is I want to get a call in really quick to get a unit out the door for the pickup, so there are less fields, less things to have to work through. Okay? But again, it's the priority that determines whether it's emergency or not. All right, so again, we can pick our company, training, call type. We'll say this one is going to be ALS. Caller, we'll say is Steve. Here I have a callback number field, 555-585-9978. That out. Caller, we'll say, is going to be patient. Problem, we'll say, is heart attack. Service level, we'll go with ALS. Fleet, we'll stick with training. Okay. Again, as we've seen before, I have my patient information. If I have it, I can put it in. Although remember, none of this is required. No red circles. All right. In fact, pickup not even required. So for this time, we could put in the patient information, go through that process again, but we've seen it. And we'll assume for this one, we don't know who the patient is. We don't have any patient information. It's a bystander that called, essentially, saying they saw somebody with an issue. All right. Or maybe it was a motor vehicle accident or, heart attack or whatever it is. We don't know the patient's information. It's not required yet. Okay. Next, pickup. So again, if we're at one of our locations, one of our resources, and I know the code, I can type in the code. Or if I don't, I can always do my search. Or if it's not a resource, if it's a scene, I can just type in the address. 15 Maple Lane. And that's White Plains, Missouri. And what's your zip code out there? Oh, West Plains. No, why did I say White Plains? I'm sorry. I'll fix that. Hold on just a second. All right, notice on the right-hand side, as I'm typing this in, the system starts to say, hey, is this the address of your scene? And it is. We'll say it's 15 East Maple Street. That's close. And I can double-click it, and the system will actually pull that matching address from Google Maps. In fact, it gives me the GPS, the lat long on it as well. So at this point, I have all the information I need for entering this emergency transport. I'm going to go ahead and save my call. The system will think for a second, and it will put that trip into my runs grid. Okay, immediately flashing to know that I got to get this out the door. Okay. Any questions on using the emergency call screen?
Yes. When you put on whether it's emergency or non-emergency, either or, whenever you put in the pickup location and it brings up, say, a known address that you put in, is there a way to classify or name that address? Say, like, you've been to Dairy Queen before. Can you put in also that it's Dairy Queen and then it's bring up the address, or you have to type in the individual address?
So if the Dairy Queen is in the system as a resource, then you can use that Dairy Queen resource. If it's not in there as an actual resource location, then you just have to put the address in.
Okay.
So if you guys are having lots of heart attacks around the Dairy Queen, maybe you want to put it in as a location. And send the health inspector over to that Dairy Queen. All right. Good question. Any other questions? Nope. All right. So let's go ahead and we'll get this call assigned out. We'll see again the other way of doing it. We have been opening the alert unit window, but I can always, let's say we want this in SH1. The click and drag works just fine. So I associate the call to SH1, and SH1 is now alerted. Okay. And so far, everything's going to be fairly similar. We'll say they are alerted. we'll put them in route. So get the workflow, there we go. And also, we'll say they are at scene. Okay. Now, while they're on scene, they're getting information about the patient. They're radioing it into us. So when we took this call, right, we did not have patient information. Now we're getting patient information. So I want to put in who the patient is for this transport. Since the call is already in the system, I can't just put it in here, right? This is putting in another call. I need to edit my transport to associate a patient with this. So I'm going to right click either the unit again or the run. Either way, it opens up that window and I have my edit run option. So I'm going to go to edit run. And when I go into edit run, we've seen this already. It opens up that trip ticket window, a trip ticket record for me. I'm on my dispatch tab. At the top of my trip ticket record, I always have my header section. The header section is always going to show me the run number, the date of service, the company associated with this. And from a billing perspective, that right-hand column there has got billing information, ticket status, assignment, and balance. On the left-hand side, though, under training company, it has a patient section to show me what patient record is associated with this trip record. Right now, there's none. We have no patient on this, so I want to add a patient. I can hit my little magnifying glass next to that patient section, and it opens up my patient search window, at which point I can just search for all of them, see all the patients I currently have in the system. A bunch of call cancels, and here's all the ones I think you guys have been importing in from EHR, so you do have lots of patients in here. I can start to narrow down. I think that's too much. I can start narrowing down by typing in parts of a name. So I can type in parts of the first name. And again, as I type in, the system narrows down what I'm looking for. Actually, typed in the wrong letters. We want FO. And again, same idea, starts to narrow down. I only see that I got one with an FO. Well, I can keep typing. And again, the system starts to show me any matching ones. Nothing matches the first name Foghorn. I'm going to still throw the last name in just to show you this here in a second. And I can put in Leghorn. All right, so no Foghorn Leghorns already in the system. This patient record does not currently exist. I need to create this patient record. Okay, so I can do that. In my little search window over the top, there's a button here, big circle with the plus sign, add new. This tells the system I want to create a brand new patient record from my trip ticket here. So I hit the add new button, and the system opens up my patient record window. Okay, I can get the same thing by hitting this patient entry button at the top. But since I hit that add new button from the trip ticket record search, the system automatically pulls in what I was searching for. Figures, hey, if you were looking for a Foghorn Leghorn, chances are when you want to create this record, the name's going to be Foghorn Leghorn. Saves me some time. Okay? So I got Foghorn Leghorn already in here. And then I will go ahead and put in his birth date if I have that. So we'll say Foghorn's birth date, 6/14/1946. Gender is male. Marital status is most definitely single. Right-hand side, this is all, the first few are all billing pieces of information. You don't have to worry about that. Date deceased, if the patient has died, we can fill out the date the patient died. The system will still let me take this patient on trips after that date deceased. It's just going to warn me. Say, hey, this guy's been dead for 4 years. Are you sure you want to take him? All right. So it can help me out a little bit. Last date of service, if I'm looking at an existing patient record, will tell me the last time I've taken this patient. Okay. Since we've never taken him before, great in the record right now, it's blank. Comments is any additional information about the patient. Alert, also additional information about the patient, but the alert section is where I can put information that might be useful, not just here in the patient record, but anywhere I use this patient. We'll see if this works in a second, but for now, we'll go ahead and say patient is fairly arrogant and rather clumsy. All right, so Additional information can go in the alert section that I want to follow this patient wherever they're used. We'll see that again works in a second. Then contact tab. Contact is where I can put, well, contact information about the patient, address information, phone number information. So we'll go ahead and add his address. Turns out he also lives at 15 East Maple Street. And the zip code there is a 677, what was it?
5.
775. So when I do that, I can type in the zip code directly. The system will then go ahead and say, oh, is it this one? And I can say yes. If I want to geocode this, just to make sure I get the right lat long, I can even hit this geocode verify address button here. And the system will go to Google Maps and give me what that lat long is that we already saw on our call screen. Great. Next, I have some check marks. Default mailing guarantor. Default means their home address, right? So we'll say, yep, that we know that's his home address. Mailing is where his correspondence will go to. So again, from the billing side, invoices, statements, that sort of thing, where we're sending and mailing information to him. We can have more than one address, and one can be marked as default, one can be marked as mailing. Maybe as a P.O. box, maybe as his mail sent to somebody else or some other location. You can have multiple addresses in here. For Foghorn, we'll say it's both the same. Guarantor is, again, more of a billing thing. If the patient has a guarantor, we can, again, fill that out and say that's the guarantor address. Next, if we have phone number information, we can add that. So 555-875512. Okay. Great. I can then save this patient record. As soon as I save the patient record, a couple things. Notice, if I come back to my trip ticket tab, voila, it shows me Foghorn is now associated with this ticket. Also notice next to that patient, next to the search button, is a little circle with a blue eye, information. Whatever I put in the alert section shows up in that little information window. Okay, so like I said, things that are important to follow the patient around with, it's a good thing to do. I'm going to save this because, again, we created the patient record right from the trip ticket record. We saved the patient record, but we've not saved this change to the trip ticket yet. So I'm going to save that. So now this patient is associated with that ticket. And we can see that. And I think there's a question earlier about how to know all the tickets that a patient has been on. Well, if I have a patient record open, and I go to the Tickets tab, since we have associated this patient with this ticket now, we can see he's on this ticket that we're working on currently. But also any tickets that he's been on in the past that are currently being billed, I will see here as well. If the tickets are no longer being billed, I can hit Show Closed Tickets. He doesn't have anything, but it'll show me all his old tickets, whether they're being billed or not. Okay. Does that answer that question about where to see old transports?
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah. And we'll look at that more again as we start playing with more patient records here too in a little bit. Okay, so Foghorn, we got him associated with this call now. Must have made some changes. Call saved. We'll go ahead and close that. Pop back into our dashboard. So now I can see, unit SH1, they're still on scene. I can see, though, on the run itself, my patient, which was blank before, now fills in with Foghorn Leghorn. Okay. So they got Foghorn. They got him loaded up. Now they are departing scene. So I'm going to process this. Now, up to this point, this emergency priority call has been pretty similar to the other priority calls we looked at already for Donald and Daffy, the scheduled transport for Daffy, the BLS priority transport for Donald. Here, though, once I get to my depart scene step, this is where things change a little bit. First of all, as soon as I get to depart scene, since I'm transporting the patient and I never entered a destination, mainly because, remember, my emergency call screen doesn't have a destination, the system's going to ask me, all right, where am I taking him? also, if I put in a call in my non-emergency call screen, instead of my emergency call screen, but in the non-emergency call screen, I also did not put a destination. Same idea. System's still going to come up at the destinations, at the depart scene step, and ask me, where are we going? Okay. If I know the code, I can type it in. Right? I know we're taking it to OMC, so I can just type that code in. If I don't, I can use my search. You've seen that before. So I put in OMC and I accept that. Then again, because we've now have a run that is a emergency priority, the system's going to come up and ask me some more information about this actual emergency transport. So I'm going to make this a little bigger, easier to see. First thing is, how many patients are we transporting? All right, defaults to 1. In this case, Foghorn. Yep. If we're taking more than 1, maybe it's an MVA, we're taking 2 or 3, whatever, however many patients are being transported on this call, I will go ahead and put in that number. And we'll play with that more probably tomorrow. We'll take a look at how that works, since we're running a little low on time today. But for now, with this call, Foghorn, he's our only patient. But I also have refused. All right, how many of my patients refuse transport? All right, and even not going. So in this case, we'll say 0. Any patients DOA? All right, so again, they show up where any of the patients dead on arrival. Again, we'll say 0 for this example. Odometer information, what's their odometer reading? We'll say 4.7. The problem shows me what I entered when I took the call as heart attack. If the crew gets on scene and says, yeah, no, it was something else, I could always update it. In this case, though, we'll leave the heart attack in there. We were right when we took the call. Transport mode, we'll go ahead and say how we're taking them. We'll say this is a land transport. And the service level shows us what we entered when we took the call. We could change it if, the information comes out that, nope, should be a BLS or whatever it is. In this case, though, we'll leave it as ALS. All right. But again, this little window with these questions come up because it was an emergency priority call. All right. And then I will go ahead and
say. So while in that emergency priority call, how you just changed that level of transport, that mode of transport, sometimes we'll have an emergency call or emergency transport from our hospital to another hospital, but we'll have to call an aircraft en route to pick up to transfer the patient the rest of the way. Is there a way to change that as well while the call is active? Or
so, like, we already set it here in this depart scene, but at this point we need to change that. I can always right-click the run or the unit that's associated with the run and choose my edit run option. And I get to my trip ticket record. That transport mode is not on my dispatch tab, it's actually on my detail tab. So here's the transport mode, and I could update this to air transport at that point.
Okay.
And then save it. And I can do that on whether it's an emergency call or not an emergency call. If I got to change that transport mode, I can always do it by right-clicking the run, choosing the edit run, and going to the detail tab. Good question. All right. Any other questions so far? No?
So right-clicking and saving your best friends.
Yeah, right-click can, especially if you need to make some changes on a trip, right-click is very useful. Or roll back a status, or we'll see tomorrow some other things that you can do with the right-click too. Okay. All right, next, so we'll say the depart scene. At this point, everything's very similar to the other trips we've been taking. Next step is at destination. When we get there, it wants to know what's our odometer information, 9.2. And then finally, they've got Foghorn unloaded. They're completed with that trip. They're available again. Okay. Any questions with the emergency transport, putting it in the emergency call screen, editing it, adding a patient after the fact, after the call's already been entered in the system because we didn't have it initially, the different steps, the different questions that we have on that depart scene step since it's an emergency transport, anything there? Nope. All right. Any questions on any of the topics that we covered today? Getting in, navigating around, customizing our dashboard, putting units on duty, entering calls, walking calls through the dispatch process, editing times, any of those workflow options that we looked at? No.
Yes, on the editing times, you can edit those while a run is currently in progress, correct?
Correct. All you got to do is get into the trip ticket record, right? So yeah, right click, edit run. Yep. Good question. Any other things I can help clarify for you? Say, not now, let us think about it and try to take it in, right?
Right.
All right. Well, with that said, we're bumping up on our time today. I know we covered a lot of our bases. Just so you know, when we get in on our next conversation, we're going to start off looking at a few other things that can happen during our day on dispatch. We'll look at, also kind of talk a little bit about those linked runs you were asking about with your MT trips, right? Picking up multiple patients and taking those. We'll take a look at some emergency calls where you have more than one patient on the transport. And then from there, we'll start looking into maybe some setting up calls on future dates of service. Currently, I have us scheduled to talk next on Thursday at 12 your time. Between now and then, if you want to get in, just kind of test putting calls into the system, putting units on duty, feel free. Otherwise, I look forward to talking to everybody on Thursday.
Sounds good.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for your time today, and I will talk to you soon.
Hey, Travis, before you go,
Yeah.
Could you bring up the map? I don't think we're getting all the information on there from our trucks. We should have one going to.
Can you zoom out a little bit? Actually, quite a bit.
Because hold on, let me. It's because that one.
Way down in Africa.
Well, that one doesn't have a GPS. And the last place.
I think it was South Howell 3.
So our system will only show unit information based off the units that are on.
South Howell 3.
So only MT1 and SH1 are currently on duty in our system. So that's why you're only seeing SH1 and MT1 here.
You put it on. Could you South Howell 3 on duty? We're not getting speed and heading. Or at least when I looked at it yesterday, we weren't getting speed and heading.
This morning, we were going happened at 5. They were saying exactly that happened, so I was trying to get into that.
Let's see, it's going to need.
Or just pull that base.
Actually, hold on. Let me do something real quick. Take unit 1 off duty for the time being. Ooh, not a service. Wrong thing.
Yeah,
So it doesn't mess with that.
You might need to zoom out to C3. It's probably 100 miles away.
Okay, so it is showing it.
So yeah, let's get the heading. It looks like it's not currently moving.
Oh, it looks like green.
Okay, I just wanted to verify that because I looked at one yesterday. It should have been moving and it wasn't, and it stayed unknown. So.
Okay, it might have just been waiting on an update from the Street Eagle GPS too.
Okay, that was
Sometimes
it.
there's delay. It'll just say unknown. If it misses the time cycle that it's expecting Street Eagle to send it, it can say unknown.
Okay.
Yep. Good. Any other questions I can
All
help
right,
you
thanks
with?
for
All right, and we'll definitely play with the map a little more, probably day 3, but we'll definitely get in here and look at a little bit. And one thing, I think you and I, Charles, have a report call tomorrow scheduled. Just so you know, that report call is more of a show and tell for you to tell me what you're looking for, give me examples of reports that you've had, or explain things that you'd like to get out of the system. There's not really enough information in our system to show any dispatch reports at this point, but it's more just tell me what you're looking for so I know what to start putting in and building in the system for you. The other thing, when we talk tomorrow, I can show you, I think I got the issue cleared up for the overlays on the mapping, so I'll show you what we need to do there too.
All right, sounds good.
Guys, well, thank you all very much for your time today. I appreciate it, and I look forward to talking to everybody on Thursday.
All right, thank you, Travis. Thank you, Travis.
All right, have a great day.
Thank you, Travis.
Me too. So are we gonna have to get the